Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Sunday Night Live with me, Jonny Lipsham, here at Jonny Lipsham Studios in Scotland. It is extremely hot and humid here. Currently, it is 15 degrees Celsius at midnight, which is very, very hot, and humidity is around about 100%. We are under a thunderstorm warning. And I've just taken a look outside about half an hour ago, and the sky is looking pretty dark. So it is quite likely that said thunderstorm is going to do its thing probably very shortly. So we will see how far we get. Now, I've been in conversation with Rich Cresswell, and he is here in Scotland. He is on the banks of Loch Teague at the moment. So, Rich, if you're watching, and I'm not sure if you're watching live because I don't know how good your signal is. We've been talking throughout the evening, and it looks like your internet signal is probably a wee bit on the patchy side. Yeah. I hope you get to watch at least some of this live. If not, hopefully you'll get to watch the replay when you're in an area with better connection. But I just wanted to say welcome to Scotland, my friend. I'm glad you're here. If you get the chance to drop into Gobridge, just let me know. I'm here, and it would be great to come and see for you to come and see the new house since I moved since 2 years ago, so it'd be nice for you to come and see the house, and that'd be great. So if you're around and you're in the neighborhood, just let me know, and I'd be happy to have you around. But also, if you have Skype enabled and you are able to, just again drop me a message and let me know if you've got network. If you have, I'll try and get you into the show, but that's entirely up to you, my friend. Otherwise, if you're not able to get into the show, it's fine. We'll schedule something so that we can do something together for both of our audiences. I think that'd be pretty cool. All right, let's go see who we got here. We got Paul Morgan, who was first in the door, followed by Billy, followed by Ronnie Figura, and Bob Ziegler is here as well. Ziggy. Good to see you, buddy. He's asking how he changes his name to Ziggy on the chat. I think what you have to do there is you have to change your channel name, your YouTube account name. So at the moment, I think it is Robert Ziegler. You can change that to Bob, or you can change that to Ziggy, or you can change that to whatever you want. But I think you only get a certain number of times you can change the channel name at any one time. But after that, I think you have to wait a period before you can change the name again. And we got Christopher here as well, who has two great questions to get us kicked off with, which we'll get to in just a second. And we got Bobby Booth, who has just joined the show. Glad to see you, Bobby. So we can actually get started now. Now, I think we may have a smaller crowd than usual tonight. It's been an absolutely glorious day here, and I wasn't sure whether I was going to be able to get to do the show or not because of the potential for thunderstorms. So, and literally just right now, I've just received a thunderstorm warning alert message. So it could all kind of kick off any minute now. And who else is here? Sean is here, and we've got Boris here as well. So cool. We've got a few people here, which is cool. Small crowds, large crowds, I don't mind. But I know that our record still currently stands at 34. It'd be great if at some point we could break that record and have more than 34 here. That'd be cool. All right, let's get to the questions because I don't know how much time we're going to have before this thunderstorm starts kicking off. So let's see. Christopher says, should you put a limiter or compressor on every track when mixing down? It's a good question. When you are mixing your song, Pretty much every tutorial that you'll ever see out there on YouTube, and some paid music production courses and mixing courses, they will talk about the two most important tools. They'll talk about EQ and they'll talk about compression. And they are pretty much the two most important tools for mixing, without a doubt. So, do you have to apply them to every channel? No, you don't. There's no rule that says you have to EQ and compress every single channel in your session. You use your ears, and you use your judgment, and you use your experience. Now, if you're new to mixing and you really don't know what is what, then the first thing you need to do is learn how an EQ works and learn how a compressor works and learn how to use both of those tools. Learn how to completely overdo it and then dial it all back. And you'll hear what it sounds like. You'll hear when you've overdone the EQ. You'll hear when you've overdone the compression. Even if you're a novice and you're brand new to this, you'll still hear it. You'll hear things like, it sounds like the sound is pumping. Yeah, that's because you've applied too much compression, or the settings for your compression are not helping the audio. They're hindering the audio. So, and then it's a case of adjusting those settings, even if you don't know what they do, adjusting those settings until it starts to sound good and it starts to sound how you would like it to sound. And then you look at what those settings are and you go, hey, actually this makes the snare drum sound really, really good. It makes the snare drum really pop. It makes the transient come through. It makes the fullness of the body of the sound great. So I want to keep that. You can save that as a preset, and you can name it Great Snare Sound. And you've got yourself a good starting point that you've created. And you're not relying upon somebody else's presets or the built-in presets. Now, the built-in presets, the ones that are designed that come in Studio One, those are good presets. And they're a good place to start. So I would definitely recommend you give those a try. But as to, do you have to do it on everything? No, you don't. You will find sometimes actually using a compressor on a certain source actually makes it sound bad. And if that's the case, just remove it. Take it off. If you prefer it without the compressor, don't use the compressor. Use your ears to inform you of what you think sounds good and go from there. And gradually, over time, your ears will get better and better and better, and you'll hear what source needs a compressor, and then eventually what type of compressor is going to work best on that particular source. You know, you will hear often on tutorial videos, oh, I use X compressor on drums, I use X compressor on bass guitar, I use X compressor on vocals, I use X compressor on saxophone, and they're talking about different compressors. Now, the thing is that some analog compressors will add to the sound. They don't just control the dynamic range, they add to the sound. And so this is often why a particular compressor is preferred for a vocal versus another compressor for, the drum bus or something. So, different compressors will do the same job. They will ultimately compress the sound. They will turn down the peaks, and they will turn up the quiet parts, which is what a compressor does, but they will also add some distinctive harmonics, some overtones, a bit of saturation, and some color. That's kind of what analog compressors do, and various plugin emulations of those do that. And that's kind of, they're meant to do that. That's by design for those particular plugins. But as to, should you use a compressor or a limiter on the master bus? It's a good question. I have always used a compressor on the insert of the master bus. Always. I always mix through a compressor. Why do I do that? Well, I never used to. It was only maybe, 20 years or so ago that I actually started doing this. And it was because when I first got into mixing, I learned to mix on a console. I didn't learn to mix in a DAW. I learned to mix on a console. And I learned to mix on an SSL. I think it was the E console. It might have been the G, I can't remember. One or the other. But anyway, it has a built-in mix bus compressor that basically goes on the 2-channel out from the mixer. And so I basically just set it and I would forget it. And basically everything that goes through the console is going through that compressor and out to the speakers. Now, what I learned through doing that was that what the compressor did was it didn't just turn down the peaks and bring up the quiet stuff. What it did was it actually tightened the mix. It brought everything together. And a lot of mix engineers refer to that as glue. It glues the mix together. And that's kind of what I found that it did. It just brought all the elements of the mix together. And particularly, you know, things like drums would kind of sound really, really good in the mix. And bass would sound really, really good. And, you know, things just kind of got nice and leveled out somehow just by using a compressor. And you don't hit the compressor hard. You just allow the compressor just to tap down a little bit on the audio. And so effectively what I'm doing is I'm mixing through that compressor. And so yes, I'm applying EQ and compression to various elements of the mix. Different channels are getting different amounts of EQ, different amounts of compression, different types of compressors going on. But all of that, the end result of that is going through one final compressor. And I mix through that. Now, the thing is, if you're going to do that, one of the things you're going to realize when you're mixing is that as you start adding EQ and compression to different elements of your mix, the volume overall of your mix is going to go up, which means the volume, the gain going into that compressor is going to get more, which means the compressor is going to tap the mix down a little bit more, and you get more compression of your overall mix. So you do have to do a little bit of a dance, a little bit of a balancing act. Just every now and then you keep an eye on your master bus, you go take a look. How much is it knocking down the gain? Is it knocking it down by more than 3 dB? If it is, then I will just back it off a little bit. I don't ever want to see more than 3 dB being knocked down by the master bus compressor, ever. And, you know, I'll maybe half that just to be on the safe side. So it's only tapping down maybe 1.5 to 2 dB. And 3 is kind of like my cutoff limit. I don't want it to compress by more than 3 dB. Generally speaking, mix engineers, they work in blocks of 3 dB. So if they're turning something up, they turn it up by 3 dB. If they turn it down, they turn it down by 3 dB. It's just kind of a rule of thumb that most mix engineers use. So should you put a limiter or compressor on every track when mixing down? No, is ultimately the answer. So to your second question, how do you keep the mud out of the mix? Another great question. And this one speaks to EQ. So there's a couple of things you can do. And actually I've covered this in my Mixing with Jonny Lipsham series, where I mixed my song Paper Deity. And I basically did a brand new mix of it. I didn't mix it the same way that I mixed it for the EP that actually went out to public release. I did a brand new mix of it. And I actually used plugins that I didn't use before. So it was a completely fresh mix of it. And I covered things like how you keep it clean, how you keep the mud out of the mix. And so there are a couple of things that you can do. One is you can apply a high-pass filter. Now, I used to be very overzealous about high-pass filtering. It's not that I go the other way now and I advocate to never high-pass. No, I say that you should high-pass filter. And you should high-pass filter to get rid of the low end of the frequency spectrum that you don't need. Like in a vocal, you don't need anything below 60 cycles per second. You don't need anything below 60 hertz, basically. You just don't. Because mostly that's going to be rumble from the room. It's going to be, you're standing in your room, and as you're singing, yes, the sound is going to go out of your voice, but also your whole body is going to be resonating, so that those vibrations are going to travel through and into the floor. So, and also your mic is standing on the floor, so that it will pick up any vibrations that are made anywhere. The mic will pick those up. So by high passing that kind of stuff out, you get a cleaner sound for your vocal. Also, things like kick drums and bass guitar. Everyone, there's a good bunch of bad information out there about EQ. And one of them is high pass everything up to 100 hertz. Basically, just pick 100 hertz and slap an EQ on every channel of your mix so that it has a high pass filter at 100 hertz on every channel. It's not great information. It's not the way it should be done. Now, I am not normally one to subscribe to rules when it comes to mixing, but this is one of them. Don't high pass to 100 hertz arbitrarily. Listen to your source. Listen to the audio on that channel. Does it need high pass to 100 or not? Decide what the source needs, and decide what the source needs in context of the overall mix. Most of the time you find it doesn't. You do need to high pass, but you don't need to high pass arbitrarily to a fixed figure. You don't. So there's a lot of bad information out there about that. But high pass filtering, what that does is that takes out the low end. It filters out any of the low end below a certain spot on the frequency spectrum. So it, quite often on an EQ, it will look like this. So anything below this side, this is the lows here, is gone. It's wiped out, and anything above that is applied to the EQ. So that's kind of what a high pass filter does. It clears out the low end. A low pass filter is the one that does the other. It looks the other way, and that if you move that down, you'll find that all the highs get rolled off. So quite often you'll find this referred to as a high cut or a low pass filter, and a high pass filter or a low cut filter. They are interchangeable phrases, and they essentially mean the same thing. So that's the first thing you can do, high pass filter. Second thing you can do is you can look to do a little notch at a certain kind of frequency area where there tends to be a lot of build-up. So for example, acoustic guitars will have a build-up between about 250 and 400 hertz, maybe 500 hertz, that kind of area. Now, if you've got a lot of acoustic guitar tracks and you're recording using the same microphone, using the same acoustic guitar, and you're sat largely in the same position, then, that build-up is going to multiply. And so you want to basically notch out of several of those guitars that area. So you can allow maybe one or two that are key acoustic guitar parts that are the most important ones, so they can come through a little bit. Everything else can kind of sit back a little bit. But also you clean that build up. So, around the 350 to 550 area, there's another area where things tend to just build up. So again, you can provide a little cut, a little notch filter of maybe 3 or 4 dB, and go from there. If it needs more, it needs more. If it needs less, it needs less. But those are two ways in which you can make sure that you keep the mud out of your mix. I'm going to give you a third one, and this is a good one. And we covered this maybe a couple of weeks back, maybe 2 or 3 weeks back. And that is to clean out the low end of your reverbs and your delays. Not a lot of people realize this, but it's actually sometimes in your mix, you're going, where is that mud? Where is it? Where is it? And you're high pass filtering, you're notch filtering all of your channels. And you go, I still can't. It's still there. Where is it? It's in your reverb and your delay. Because you're sending a copy of the signal, maybe pre-fader, maybe post-fader. Doesn't really matter particularly, but you're sending a copy of that signal to your reverb. And so all of that frequency buildup is going to appear in your reverb and your delay. It will all multiply up and it will all add up together. And so you find that that's where you get buildup, is in your reverbs and your delays and, you know, any other ambient effects that you're using in your mix. So the secret sauce here is to apply an EQ either before or after your reverb or delay plugin on your effects channel or your bus channel, whichever you're using. And use a high pass filter to wipe off the low end. You can be really extreme with this. You can put that high pass filter up to 300 hertz if you want. Again, just use your ears, use your judgment. You want the reverb to sound good, you want it to sound full, but you don't want it to sound muddy. And if necessary, solo the reverb so that all you are hearing is the reverb, and then apply your high pass filter until you think it sounds not too thin, but not too muddy. And then again, you can take off some of the high end as well. You don't maybe want the reverbs and delays to be too bright, particularly with cymbals and sibilants and that kind of thing. Anything that's got lots of high end sparkle in it, you want to be careful about those going into reverbs and delays, because, you know, they can end up over brightening your mix and making it sound a little too brittle. But there's a bunch of tips there for cleaning out mud in your mix. Those two are great questions, Christopher. Thank you very much. Excellent questions. All right, let's see. Do we have any other questions? We don't so far. But Bobby Booth says, I only put a limiter on my master fader and it's the last plugin. He says, some tracks I would stack a couple of compressors. Yes, I do this too. On a vocal, maybe. On a vocal, I will maybe have a couple of different compressors. I maybe have something nice and smooth going into something a little more aggressive. For example, I often have an LA2A style compressor, and then that goes into an 1176 style compressor. Or I'll use some other optical compressor maybe. I've done that before. Or I'll use a tube style compressor going into a FET style compressor. It doesn't matter kind of the brand of it. But I often do that because I often use the smooth compression basically just to kind of, kind of smoothly tame and control things. And then I'm using the next compressor, which is often faster. It has a faster attack and a faster release to kind of, just add some color maybe. But also the other benefit is that rather than having one compressor doing 10 dB worth of gain reduction, lighten the load. Put two compressors there, even if they're just standard stock compressors. Set them up the same way if you want. Have the same attack and release, the same threshold, the same ratio. Have the same everything, but just have two instances of it. And what that can do is you just set them so that they're doing 3 or 4 dB each of compression. So you don't have one compressor just going. You have two compressors, one after the other, going doink, 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 or doink, and it shares the load, and it makes the compression a lot smoother and a lot less obvious that you're applying a lot of compression. Sometimes you do need to apply a lot of compression for certain styles of music. And so stacking multiple compressors is a good way to do that, especially if you need to do a lot of compression. And then, of course, you're using makeup gain on each one of those compressors. And so, ultimately everything is getting turned up and the dynamic range is getting controlled more and more. So certain styles of music, you don't want loads of dynamics in the vocal. You want everything to be pretty in your face. And so stacking a good couple of compressors will do that for you. I've listened to records where the singer is really belting it. Maybe it's a soul record, and it's a big power ballad, and the singer is belting it, and you can hear the compressor. Certainly I do with my ears, and I almost instinctively kind of shrink my head into my neck and into my shoulders when I hear it, because I can hear the compressor going and squashing down on the vocal, and then eventually lifting off. I can hear it, and it's not just that I hear it, I feel it. It's the weirdest thing, and it's uncomfortable, and I don't like that style of compression, where you just have so much compression going on that it just sounds like somebody has stomped on the vocal. I don't like that. Whereas if you've got a couple of compressors or 3 compressors that are doing a little bit each, you can have the same effect of a lot of compression, but it's happening over several compressors, and you don't get that very obvious feeling and sound of the audio being smashed. So that's a really good question. Christopher says, when I mix down, I get clipping, but it does not show in the mixer. This is another good question. So if you are doing, you're going to song, export, mix down, and in the dialogue, you get yellow letters that say, hey, you've clipped. But the master bus, the red clip light has not lit up. You might be experiencing something called intersample peaking. And I have talked about this before, maybe a while back. So it's worth reviewing this. And so this can be caused, even if you have a limiter in the post section of the master fader, even if you have that, you can still get intersample peaking if you don't set the ceiling and threshold correctly. What is intersample peaking? Well, intersample peaking is when the audio peaks between one sample and the next. And the reason why it doesn't get detected is because the DAW is only listening to the samples. It's not listening to what happens between the samples. So it never picks up that it's peaked over 0 dB. But the net result is the sample after the peak can end up getting shaved off and clipped. And you get some distortion. And it's not the nice kind of distortion. It's not saturation. It's digital distortion created by clipping. And so there's a few things that you can do here. Number one, you can turn everything down a little bit. So just select all of your faders and just turn them down a couple of dB. If you've got 30 channels in your mix, turning everything down by 2 dB will do the job. And you'll not get your audio peaking anywhere near 0 dB. Another thing you can do if you're going to use a limiter in the post of the master fader, and I only ever recommend you're doing this if you're sending out a draft mix or a rough mix for other people to listen to and evaluate. Because by doing that, you can turn it up so that it hits the commercial threshold, so that it's listenable in a car. It's listenable on a boombox at home in your lounge, for example. It's listenable there, and you don't have to crank the volume up to hear it. So that would be where you would use a limiter on the post of the master fader. If you're going to be doing any mastering, don't do that. If you're going to be sending the song off to a mastering engineer, don't do that. But if you're sending it to be evaluated or reviewed in any way, put the limiter in the master bus, and then set the ceiling and the threshold of the limiter to -1 dB. Don't set it to minus 0.05 or 0.5. Don't do that, or even 0.01. I've seen people do that. Don't set it that close to 0. Because if you set it that close to 0, you can get into sample peaks, and the limiter will never catch them, and you'll still get clipping. So set it to -1, and that means you've got a 1 dB gap, a 1 dB headroom. So basically, even peaks between samples are never gonna get into this 1 dB space, and therefore you will never clip your master bus. You will never get into sample peaking. It just won't happen. Now, sometimes I do break my own rule, and I do use a limiter on my master fader, even if I am sending it off to mastering, or all of that, or sending it off to a mastering engineer, or I'm doing it in the project page myself. But here's the key thing I don't do is I don't crank up the gain. I leave the gain set to 0. And all I'm doing is I'm just allowing a little bit of protection so that I don't get that intersample peaking. That's it. So it never actually does any compression. It's just there as protection. But for the most part, I don't do that. But there you go, Christopher. I hope that that helps you with that. Let's see. Boris says he goes 1176 to LA2A. Yeah, so you and I do it the other way around. But sometimes I do it that way around too. It kind of depends. For me, it depends upon the source. Now, we did have 14 people, and we've just lost a bunch of people. So we've got 10 people in here, which is a bit disappointing. Sean says, try putting the compression on the bus and see if that takes care of the load. Can I speak on pattern versus part mode for programming drums? Yeah, we can do that. I'll need to open a new song to do it, though. So bear with me just a minute whilst I get a new song going. And we'll go and get Impact. And we'll go and grab. And yes, we're not in classroom mode at the moment. Give me a second and I will put it into class mode. Let's see if this kit still works. I don't know whether it does. There we go. Okay, yeah, that kit kind of works. It's a little on the quiet side though. Don't know why those samples overall are a little quiet. That's a bit better. Yeah, nothing's been normalized. Okay, let's go into the classroom. And let me turn my camera on. There we go. All right, so let's see. So I've got this drum set here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the difference between part and pattern. Now, this is a part. And this opens up by default in the drum edit view here. Now, this is in seconds. I don't know why this has gone to seconds, because normally it should go to bars. And time base, bars. All right, so you can create a drum part just as easily here by, you know, putting in now you might think, hey, this is the long way around. Well, you know what? I did this for decades. I did this like this in the 80s for a long time. Okay, so now I've got my little 1-bar loop. All right, so I've got my little 1-bar loop right here. And now what I can do is I can select all of those and I can duplicate those. There we go, get the last bar in. And actually that's fairly straightforward. And you can be as complicated as you want. It depends upon how much you know about drums. Or, let's remove this. The other thing you can do is you can create, I think it is it shift or is it control double click? No, it's not that. There you go. So we've got a pattern instead of a part now. So all I did was Alt or Option and double click to create a pattern. And now I've got a pattern. And I can do something similar. Now, these are 16th notes. So each group of 4 is 1 beat. And this is going to garner me pretty much the same thing. The cool thing about patterns is you can create variations. If I can remember how to do them. So this is variation 1. So we can create a different pattern that has different velocities and different values and different things going on in the pattern here. So let's play this. So one of the things you can do here is you can open up the automation lane here by just clicking on this squiggly line here. At the moment it's set for velocity, but we can have repeats. All right, so if I go to repeats, and at the moment, let's set that one to 3 just for fun. Let's see what happens if I set that one to 3 as well. Do I have to loop this? I'm not sure what I have to do here to get this to repeat. Let's set this to bars. Yeah, this doesn't really seem to be doing what I'm thinking it should be doing. Maybe if I change the resolution, I don't know. Yeah, I'm definitely not an expert on patterns, but Gregor has a great video on how to create really creative and imaginative patterns. But you can do different things with this, and like I said, you can create different variations if you want to as well. If I can remember how to do it. Trying to remember how you create variations. There you go. So we click this button here, this I button, and then we can create a new variation, and we can go do something a bit funkier. What should we do with the hi-hat? Something like that, just for fun. And so what we can do now is we can select variation 1 or variation 2. So let's duplicate this, and then let's make this variation 2. And then we'll do another duplication. I'll make that one variation 1. And we'll do one more. And make this variation 2. And then we can play this. So you can create things like drum fills and all sorts of other things that you might want and create them as variations. And then in your arrangement, you can recall those and have them as a pattern that you just select from that little drop down. So you can have pattern 1, pattern 2, pattern 1, pattern 2, drum fill, which might be variation 3, at the end of the phrase there, or whatever you want it to be, and you can do all sorts of fun things with repeats and things, like I said. So yeah, Well worth having a look at. Check velocity on hats. Not hearing the hi-hats. Oh, I think I know why. I think the hi-hat itself is just very quiet. Open hi-hat. Yeah, the hi-hat itself is really, really quiet. Let's try that. Nope, wrong one. That's really, really loud. Let's not normalize that. Let's just turn up the gain a bit. And actually, you should actually be able to hear the repeats on that hi-hat now. You hear that brrr on the hi-hat? That's those repeats. All right, so you can have an absolute boatload of fun with this. So go check those out. So hopefully you guys could hear the hi-hat then. Bobby Booth says the 1 dB ceiling, the negative 1 dB ceiling is what I've learned from you. Well, there you go. I'm glad you've learned something, Bobby. I forget who I learned that from. I can't remember at all who I learned that from. But yeah, somebody sat me down, and because it must have been early in my Cubase days, and I think I was probably just getting annoyed with the fact that I was doing mix downs and they you know, they had clipping, and I was just like, but I've done this mix properly, there should be no clipping. And somebody said, hey, check this out. And it looks like Rich Cresswell is here. Studio One Tuts, my good friend Rich is here. And he, as I said earlier, I don't know whether you caught this, Rich, earlier on in the show, but I did tell people that you are here in Scotland. You're at Loch Teague, which is awesome. It's a beautiful place. I hope the weather is not too bad where you are. We here in Gobridge and the Lothians and Edinburgh area, we are under a thunderstorm watch. So I hope it's not going to be anywhere near where you are. Because that will not be much fun at all for you. Billy says -1 was a JG trick. Yeah, I learned it years ago. So Jonny may have heard it from a similar source as I did. But I learned it many, many years ago. Probably, you know, when was I using Cubase? From, well, when Cubase version 1 came out. But it wasn't until Cubase, when they had audio in Cubase, that I started to experience that problem. Because when it was entirely MIDI, you don't really experience that problem. But as soon as you start getting audio in there, so I think that might have been Cubase 2 or Cubase 3, can't quite remember which. So that must have been, you know, around about 2000, 2001, 2002, something like that. I don't recall. Rich says, surprisingly good signal. The thunderstorms blew the cobwebs off the router. Well, there you go. So you've had thunder already. Okay, that's cool. Yeah, we are due to get one imminently. I've just received, as I said earlier in the show, I actually received a warning alert on my computer. So I'm hoping that we don't lose internet here. But I'm glad you're here, Rich. I'm glad you're here, and hopefully you will be able to make it down to this end of Scotland before you head back down south to England. If you are able, let me know, Rich. Drop me a message and come and hang out for sure. That'll be good. That'll be awesome. Let's see. I don't think we have any more questions. And we don't have a lot of people here. We got 10 people here. And we peaked at 14. That's got to be the quietest this show has ever been. Complete contrast to Wednesday's show, where we had like 25, 26 people. So, yeah. We're a little bit low on numbers tonight. I don't know if there's like some major event or something. Let's see. Rich says, I'm west of Jonny, so it may head your way. Yeah, I am watching that storm cell, and it is heading this direction. So probably going to hit us maybe in the next 20 minutes, maybe. So we'll probably wrap up the show in about 5 minutes. Because I don't want to get caught out. Because the last thunderstorm we had here was brutal. And I had to shut everything down and to protect all my gear. So Rich is out by Loch Teague. So he is kind of in the outback, the Scottish outback. He's out in the wilds, in the countryside, in my glorious country. Boris says low numbers but good convo and info. Well, there we go. Thank you, Boris. That makes me feel a lot better about the fact we've only got 10 people here. I think this might actually be an all-time low record, actually. But that's okay. You know, we've had some good questions, which is great. And good conversation, and there's good people here. So the people that are here are awesome. You guys are fantastic. But it looks like we don't have any more questions. And I'm going to go and check email. And see if anybody has emailed a question. And it does not look like it. So, just in case you don't know, if you would rather not be limited by the 200 characters of the YouTube chat for asking your question, you can ask a longer form question, and you can do that through email. You can do that through my website. So I think I showed this last week, but let's review this again. So here we are on my website. Look, there's my pretty picture up there. There we are. There's me. And that's from a much older show, actually. Look at that chair. Completely different. And that shirt definitely doesn't fit me anymore. But if we go up to the top here, if you click this button here, you'll get a bunch of seeing as we're talking about compression, I've done a whole free tutorial series that you can download to your computer, which means there's no ads, so there's no commercial breaks during the videos. You can watch them with no ads. So if you click this button here, it'll take you to a page where you just drop in your email address, and we'll send you the video series, and we'll also send you the multitrack files for one of my songs, and you can practice your compression skills on those multitrack files. I'd be delighted for you to have that as my free gift to everybody here. If you've not done this already, please go ahead and do this. Also, if you want to email me a question for either a Wednesday or a Sunday night show and you want to get this to me ahead of time, you can do that as well. Just, you can either scroll down to the bottom or you can hit contact us. It'll take you to the same place. And just fill out your name and your email address here, and then put your question in here. Tell me which show you are directing it to. If it's for songwriting, music theory, composing, arranging, that kind of stuff, then it would be for Songwriting Simplified. If it's a more technical mixing, mastering, Studio One kind of a question, then that'll be for Sunday Night Live. So just, tell me which show you want this question answered on, and then give me the details of your question, and I'll read it out on the show, and I will answer it on the show. And if necessary, also, I will consider making a stand-alone video, particularly if it's a much more complex issue or a more complex question that may take some time, where we don't want to take too much time away from the show and other people's questions to be able to tackle it. So if it's a much more complex issue, that's okay. I may well consider, rather than using it in the show, actually make a video all on its own for that question. So we can do that either way. And then just hit send message. And I will get the email. And then I will be ready for it, ready to go at the start of the show that you want the question dealt with on. All right. So there we go. We are going to end the show there. Rich says, it is very calm here for sure. I'll be able to Zoom, fingers crossed. Yeah, providing your internet's good. And you had a catch of fish for dinner. Cool. Awesome. All right, we'll end it here. I don't see that Mike is in here. Otherwise, I would say, hey, let's go over to his for the after show. But yeah, I'm not seeing that. So otherwise, folks, I will see you on Wednesday for Songwriting Simplified. We're going to continue talking about melody writing and that kind of thing. So we're going to talk about a useful subject, which is counter melody and harmony. So harmony parts, and I'm not talking about chords. I'm talking about a harmony part to accompany a main melody. And also we'll talk a little bit about counter melody and what that is and how you can use that in your songs and in your instrumental compositions as well. So that will be Wednesday's show. And until then, folks, I will bid you all a very good night. And thank you very much, those of you that are here. Thank you very much for coming. And I will see you on Wednesday. Good night, everybody.